G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to War Thunder with Mags, and welcome to efficient ground forces farming in simulation mode. So with the recent re-edition of simulation mode in patch 1.4.15, I have to say Gaijin have completely outdone themselves with the quality and effects of simulation now. As you can see, we now have a fully modelled fighting compartment in all of our vehicles. The overall graphical effects of the game have also been increased. I mean, just have a look outside, look at that. The ground and the effects around are almost photorealistic. It's amazing. The shadow effects, the textures, the high resolution dirt and dust that builds up across the engine cowling and across the glass, the effects of the mirrors, everything is done to magnificent detail. I really can't fault the graphical effects this patch. It's truly impressive. This attention to detail even moves beyond the visual effects of the environment into the sound. If you listen closely, you can hear the squeaking of metal, you can hear the revs of the engine purring along at 1200 RPM, bringing us in on our target. Even the sound of the hydraulics, you can hear them working, you can hear the suspension working now, although the suspension is not without fault. Although I will say there is one downside. Track IR is definitely a requirement for ground forces simulation. Now it's incredibly hard in order to drive the vehicles and be able to look around with the mouse at the same time. Incredibly difficult. But the attention to detail within the fighting compartment wasn't enough. They went to the effort of modelling fully working opening and closing crew access hatches. And as you can see, these are actually a requirement to use now, as they've expanded upon the towing mechanics and enabled towable equipment as something that you can now have within War Thunder ground forces. Now, as you can see here, we're about to hook up to a set of discs. Now these are sort of like a reverse minesweeper. They rip up the ground behind the vehicle, opening up and clearing the ground so future, heavier ground forces vehicles can come into the combat area and clean up later. Now, for those of you who like to see shots of your machine from the outside, Gaijin have enabled a third-person developer camera view. Now, you can activate this view and you can look around the outside of your vehicle. However, you cannot drive the vehicle and operate the camera at exactly the same time. So this is a playoff. It gives you the effect of what it would be like to be on the ground outside. Now, as you can see, we've just about got our machine into position on the discs. We're just going to need to make a few adjustments in order to get the pin in place, and we can get to farming. Now, it does take a couple of minutes to get your machine lined up and the pin locked into place. However, as you can see, the pin is fully modelled along with the discs done in incredible detail. They look like really worn pieces of equipment, and now that they are in position, we can go to work. So throttled up and off to work. Now, gear selection is very important in efficient ground forces farming. You need to be able to keep enough speed up to make sure that the equipment is operating correctly, but you need to be going slow enough to make sure it does the job right and you don't damage the equipment. Actually dragging things across the ground too hard now will actually break them and rip components off, so you must be very careful with this. Physics effects are also fully modelled on the equipment this time around. So for example, the discs are angled in such a way that for efficient usage they can only be turned left. Turning them sharply right will actually break them, so you must be very careful, constantly watching your left hand turns in order to make sure everything is very online. As I said earlier, equipment speeds are very important. I recommend when you're using something like the disc to be operating in about 6th gear at about 1500 RPM, no more, otherwise you put too much strain on the discs, they tow them too quickly through the ground. And as I said, under no circumstances turn right. The damage modelling on the machines is damn near perfect now. They will break the discs or pieces of equipment just like the discs that are directional based, and well, Gaijin have changed the repair times from measured in hours or instant repair. They're now in full simulation mode as well. The repair time on discs is measured in weeks. The terrain deformation effects are now in full swing as well. As you can see, we've changed from a dusty light terrain to a light grassed area, and you can see how hard the machine is now rocking around as you're pulling through a vastly denser, thicker material. It really does put some force on the machine and requires you to slow it down and control your speed. It's also very important to watch the terrain deformation details now. It tells you where you've been, where you've efficiently farmed, and what areas you still need to combat in. Now, I did say earlier that Gaijin had modelled the fighting compartment of their new machines in exquisite detail, but they actually went further than that. They've now taken the DCS approach and actually gone for fully clickable and manipulatable cockpits. For example, this lever here elevates and depresses the primary armament of your machine. A simple push forward or pull back elevates or depresses the primary armament of your machine. A simple twist to the left or right further adjusts the fine tuning of the armament to make sure you get your angles perfectly correct. And as I said before, the sound, you can hear the hydraulics working. Controls over to the right hand side, additional hydraulic controls. These controls here allow you to manipulate further pieces of equipment that can be attached to the back of your machines now. This here is the forward set throttle. Now you push this forward and it locks the throttle into position. It does exactly the same thing as the accelerator pedal, which is the orange one that you find down here to the right. Brake is obviously one here to the left, with the clutch pedal further to the left again. The orange lever to the left hand side of the steering wheel engages forward and reverse. When it's set to the center position, it's in neutral. The next stick down controls all your lighting arrays, and on the opposing side the stick operates your wiper controls and bad weather warning systems, which you will need during stormy weathers. Further to your right hand side and just down from the stick at the bottom of the screen is the actual gear lever. Now they have modelled the gearboxes in all of the machines accurately now. This particular machine has a 16/16 gearbox, so 16 gears in forward, 16 gears in reverse, and then there are of course the air conditioning controls and the radio, which is incredibly important, especially in those long battles. Accessing the commander's hatch is quite easy. Simply squeeze the bar to the left hand side and then stand up and look around. Now at this point in time the binoculars are not fully modelled into simulation. They have been removed for further adjustment, but Gaijin assured in the patch notes that they should be re-added sometime soon. There are further controls modelled, such as hydraulic pressure controls, seat and seat position settings, as well as emergency stops for the vehicle. However, I will show these in a future video. So let's re-engage forward gear and go back to work. I should probably add at this point, as you've seen it a few times but I haven't really pointed it out, the instrument cluster itself is fully operational. All gauges are working, including temperature gauges and fuel gauges, and these are worth monitoring, as over time you will run out of fuel now and you will need to return to base in order to resupply your vehicle. What is interesting about the instrument cluster, however, is it does not include a speed gauge. It only includes an RPM gauge, as that is the more important number when operating a heavy ground vehicle. There is, however, a timer in that does timing between matches, between services, so you'll also know when to return to base on those. Now I'm sure at this time you've already noticed, at this point we haven't encountered any other vehicles. This is because Gaijin found that the simulation aspect of the game was more important in Ground Forces Simulation than the actual way the matchmaker operated, and the matchmaker never managed to balance the matches anyway, so for this moment they've limited the size of the matches to one player only. The multiplayer aspect of the mode now works by having you come in and do your part of the battle, farming out your particular set of the map. Once your part has been completed, you leave, and then another player within a new vehicle will come in and perform the second part of the area. This can happen 2 to 3 times. I just have to stop here and just have a look at those dust effects. I mean, the art department has really outdone themselves. That looks beautiful. I don't think I've ever seen the dust effects so realistic in any game, ever. However, you will notice at the moment there is a lot of bouncing around inside of the fighting compartment, and that is because I'm not entirely sure Gaijin has managed to get the suspension modelled quite perfectly yet. It still seems a little hard. This is also a point where having the freeform camera inside of the fighting compartment is very important. You really do need to check back on the equipment that is behind you. As you can also see there is a control system already mounted inside of this machine for another piece of equipment that can be mounted for other farming applications. But yes, you always need to check behind you in order to make sure that your equipment is on track to target. So on the multiplayer side, the reduction of only one person per match may not be for everybody. However, I have noticed that the cases of spam and abuse in chat have been significantly reduced since this was implemented in. Gaijin have very cleverly manipulated some of the gameplay mechanics that players found within simulation battle as well. In the past there were constant complaints about players cutting the grass and trimming the trees. Well, these are now completable mission objectives within War Thunder Simulation. Now I'm just going to hold the battle up here for a second. We're going to go to the third person development camera and have a look at the external view on our machine and see how the effect of the last several hours of gameplay have affected the overall appearance of the machine. And as you can see, there is a clear red dirt build-up and dust build-up over the entire machine. Sections of it are darkened off. Particular areas that were black and relatively clean before no longer are, so the graphics modelling is truly amazing. Also note the sound. The sound outside of the vehicle is completely different to the sound that was inside. I should probably also mention rendering and render distances. You'll notice in the background the rendering distance on the terrain is exceptionally far, including outside of the battlefield. These cannot be reduced, however they don't seem to affect in-game performance at all. The frame rate is incredibly high. There is almost no tearing or graphical anomalies inside of the effect, it is truly remarkable. It's also worth noting that soft cover, items that have been removable in the graphics effects in the past, can no longer be removed. They are permanently enabled at all times, which is something that a lot of hardcore simulation players have been asking for an exceptionally long period of time, even since Ground Forces was first introduced. Interestingly enough, the way they've rejigged the engine doesn't seem to affect frame rate at all. Now this of course does add some additional challenge to the single player simulation mode. As you can see in the video at the moment, we've moved further up the battlefield than we were before, and we're farming out an entirely new area. Because the train features cannot be disabled now, and you'll see when we turn the corner here in just a moment, the effect in the background is that particular pieces of terrain can now block and cover up particular areas, so you really need to be aware of your environment in order to be able to see exactly what's going on. And as you can see, coming up on the left hand side here, there is a large ridgeline that was actually obscuring this entire section of the battlefield from further on, the area that we've already completed. As with all game modes, situational awareness is key and a requirement in order to be very efficient in Ground Forces farming. Once again, I have to mention the quality of the dust effects here. I mean, this just looks absolutely incredible. How it's just misting and obscuring the background just enough to make seeing what you're doing ahead of you that little bit harder. It's really beautiful. The particle effects are excellent. When it comes to dust and environmental effects, I'm pretty sure War Thunder is now king. So I'm pretty sure this mission is now completed. We're just going to step out of Commander's view one last time just to survey the battlefield and make sure we've efficiently farmed out everything that is within the area. And it is looking very good. It looks like we've just about got everything in order. Both sections of the battlefield behind the ridgeline is now covered. It looks like all areas are now done. Now this is one thing we need to talk about with the length of battles now. Simulation has gone for a simulation approach again, much like in everything else that they've now done. Battle times can now be anywhere between 2 and 16 hours, depending on the size of the battlefield that you're on and the style of farming that you're trying to do. But the rewards for Ground Forces simulation are now based entirely around the time that you actually spend in the battlefield, so it's arguable whether or not this is actually going to make grinding faster or slower in the long run. I guess only time will tell. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the video. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more, drive smart, drive safe, and I'll catch you on the battlefield. Oh, and happy April 1st.